I want you to picture something with me. It's 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. I'm sitting in my dark kitchen in my socks, holding my phone so tight my knuckles hurt. On the screen is an app, a stupid little app I set up 2 years ago to save money on electricity. And that app is showing me my own front door opening at 2:14 p.m. today, while I was 40 miles away at work, sitting through a budget meeting, laughing at a coworker's joke, having absolutely no idea my entire marriage was about to come apart at the seams. I already knew my wife was homesick that day. She'd texted me a picture of NyQuil and a heating pad. Dying, she wrote, with a little skull emoji. So why does my smart lock say the door opened from the outside? Why does the thermostat log show the temperature drop by 4 degrees at 2:12 p.m., like someone propped open a door for 2 full minutes? And why, when I tap on the doorbell camera history, there's a 23-minute gap? Deleted. Not no motion detected. Deleted. My wife is a lot of things. Smart, careful, meticulous even. She color codes our spice rack. She has never once left a load of laundry in the washer overnight in 11 years of marriage. So when I tell you she thought she'd covered every single track, I need you to understand she almost did. Stick with me, because what I found over the next 6 weeks isn't just a story about betrayal. It's a story about how technology doesn't lie, even when people do. And by the end of this, you're going to understand exactly how I turned every smart device in my house into a weapon. But first, let me take you back, because to understand how badly this hurt, you need to know what I thought I had. Hey, welcome in. If you're new here, I tell true stories, real experiences, some mine, some shared with me by people who trusted me to tell them right. Names and identifying details are always changed to protect privacy, but the emotions, the choices, the consequences, all real. If revenge stories, betrayal stories, or karma finally catches up stories are your thing, hit subscribe now, because I post these every week, and I promise you, you do not want to miss what's coming in this one. I'll tell you right now, this gets so much worse before it gets better. What starts as a suspicious log entry on a smart thermostat turns into a 6-week operation that involves a second phone, a fake business trip, 3 of my wife's closest friends, and an ending that made my own lawyer go quiet for a full 10 seconds before he said, "Remind me never to make you mad." So get comfortable. This one's long, and it's worth every minute. Let's start at the beginning, back when I thought I had the perfect marriage. My name's Mark. I'm 38 years old. I work in IT infrastructure for a mid-sized logistics company, and for 11 years I was married to a woman named Jenna. I met Jenna at a mutual friend's barbecue back when I was 26. She showed up late, hair still damp from a run, apologizing to everyone individually like she'd personally inconvenienced each guest. I thought that was the most endearing thing I'd ever seen. I found out later that was just her, thoughtful to a fault. Or so I believed. We dated for 2 years, got engaged on a hiking trip in Colorado, and got married in her parents' backyard with string lights and a bluegrass band. I remember standing at the altar. Well, it was really just an arch her dad built out of old fence posts, and thinking, I am the luckiest man in America. I want to tell you a little bit about who I was back then, too, because I think it matters for understanding the rest of this story. I've always been the practical one. In every friendship, every family gathering, every relationship I've ever been in, the one who remembers birthdays, the one who fixes things around the house without being asked, the one who shows up early to help set up and stays late to help clean up. I don't say that to paint myself some kind of saint. I say it because I think it explains, at least partly, why Jenna was drawn to me in the first place, and also, painfully, why she eventually looked elsewhere for something else entirely. For the first 6-7 years, I want to be honest with you, it was good. Not perfect, no marriage is perfect, but good. We built a life. I got promoted twice. She worked her way up from an admin assistant to an office manager at a mid-size real estate firm. We bought a house in the suburbs, nothing fancy, 3-bed, 2-bath, a yard big enough for the dog we never got around to getting. I was the smart home guy in the friend group. You know the type. I automated everything. Lights that turned on when you walked in a room, a thermostat that learned our schedule, door locks you could open with your phone, cameras on the porch, the driveway, the backyard. Jenna used to tease me about it constantly. "You just want an excuse to buy more gadgets," she'd say, rolling her eyes while I proudly showed her a new smart plug. "I want our home to run itself so we can focus on the stuff that matters."
Looking back now, I installed that entire ecosystem out of love. I wanted to make her life easier. I wanted the porch light to turn on automatically when she pulled in the driveway after a late shift, so she never had to walk to a dark house. I wanted the thermostat to have the house perfectly warm by the time she got home from her Tuesday gym class. I had no idea I was building the very system that would eventually expose her. Looking back now, with everything I know, there's something almost darkly funny about the fact that my entire personality, the endless tinkering, the constant upgrading, the running joke among our friends that I could never leave well enough alone, turned out to be exactly what a careful, deliberate deception couldn't survive. I wasn't paranoid, I wasn't suspicious, I was just thorough, in the most ordinary, unremarkable way. And it turned out ordinary thoroughness is its own kind of quiet protection. I want to tell you about one specific memory because I think it captures exactly what I believed my marriage was before any of this started. It was our 7th anniversary. Jenna had planned the whole day without telling me anything. She was always better at surprises than I was, always 3 steps ahead when it came to little romantic gestures. She'd taken the day off work, packed a cooler, and driven us out to this quiet lake about 90 minutes from our house, somewhere we'd gone on one of our very first dates. We sat on a blanket by the water for hours. She'd brought a playlist of songs from when we first started dating, the cheesy early 2000s stuff neither of us would admit to still loving. At one point, she leaned her head on my shoulder and said, "I still can't believe I get to do life with you." I remember thinking that was one of the best days of my entire life. I've replayed that day more times than I can count since all of this happened. And here's the strange, painful thing I've had to come to terms with. I don't actually think that day was fake. I think in whatever complicated way a person can hold 2 contradictory truths at once, she meant it when she said it. That's what makes betrayal like this so much harder to process than a simple story of someone falling out of love. It's not that every good memory was a lie. It's that somehow both things were true at the same time, the love and the deception. She could sit on that blanket and mean every word, and still, within a few years, decide meaning it wasn't going to stop her from taking something else on the side. Around year 8 is when things started shifting. Small things, nothing you'd flag in the moment. Only in hindsight do these details become a pattern. She started going to a new gym with a way better trainer. She'd come home flushed, hair different, sometimes showered already. When I asked how the workout was, she'd give me
these clipped one-word answers. Good. Intense. Never elaborating the way she used to, when she'd tell me about which machine she used or how her legs were sore. She got a new phone and set up Face ID herself instead of letting me help like she always did. "I just want to learn how to do it," she said. I remember thinking that was a little odd, but I brushed it off. People change. People get more private about their phones. That's normal, right? Her work hours got elastic. She'd started at the real estate office 5 years earlier, working a strict 9 to 5. Suddenly, she was doing open houses on weekends and closing paperwork that ran late into the evening, 2, sometimes 3 nights a week. I remember one night specifically. It was raining. I'd made dinner, and I texted her around 7:30 asking when she'd be home. She said 8. She got home at 10:15, hair perfectly dry despite the rain outside, claiming she'd just gotten to the car when I texted. I noticed it. I filed it away, and then I did what a lot of trusting people do. I let it go. Because the alternative, the idea that my wife was lying to me, was too heavy a thing to carry around every day. It was easier to believe her. Around this same stretch of time, Jenna went on her first work conference, a 2-day real estate certification thing about an hour and a half away, something her office apparently required every couple of years to keep agents current on state regulations. I offered to drive her since it was a weekday, and she brushed it off quickly, said she'd rather drive herself so she could leave straight from the office the day before. I remember dropping her at the door that morning with a hug and telling her to have fun learning about zoning law or whatever it was. She laughed at that, kissed me, and left. She came back 2 days later with a tote bag full of conference swag, a lanyard, a notepad, a couple of pens with the certification program's logo on them. She talked about a boring keynote speaker and a decent hotel breakfast. It was, on its face, the most mundane story imaginable. I have thought about that conference more times than I can count since all of this came out. I have no direct proof, even now, of exactly what happened during those 2 days. No smart home logs exist for a hotel 45 minutes away. But once you know how deliberate and organized she was capable of being, once you've seen the phantom open houses and the deleted footage and the guest network logs, a completely mundane, well-documented, prop-filled work trip starts to look less like an alibi and more like a rehearsal. I'll never know for certain, and honestly, some questions you have to eventually let go of, or they'll eat you alive. But I'd be lying if I told you that memory doesn't still sit uneasily with me. There's a particular kind of red flag that's almost invisible until you already know what you're looking for, and one of ours was the family group chat.
Jenna had always been close with her sister and her 2 best friends from college, Danielle and Priya. They had a group chat. They'd been in it for years. I'd see it pop up on her phone screen constantly, notifications every few minutes some days. Then, around year 9, it just stopped, or at least stopped showing up when I was around. I asked her about it once. "You guys still doing the group chat thing?" She shrugged. It's just quieter now. Everyone's busy." I believed her. Why wouldn't I? Here's something I want you to sit with for a second, because I think a lot of you watching this will recognize it. The scariest part of being deceived by someone you love isn't the lying itself. It's how normal they make it feel. Jenna didn't get cagey and paranoid like people in movies. She got smoother, more confident, more affectionate even on the days she'd clearly just been somewhere she shouldn't have been. She'd come home from those late paperwork nights and be extra sweet to me, cook my favorite meal, initiate date nights, buy me a gift just because. I used to think, wow, I really married an amazing woman. Now, I understand that was guilt dressed up as generosity. There's one moment from around this time that I think about constantly now. We were at a friend's anniversary party, and someone made a toast about finding your person and trusting them with everything. Jenna squeezed my hand under the table during that toast. I remember feeling so lucky. I remember thinking, 11 years in, and she still gets emotional at stuff like this. I know now she wasn't emotional because of me. I want to tell you about one more thing before we move forward, because in hindsight, it might be the biggest red flag of all, and I completely missed it at the time. About 10 months before I found anything on the smart home logs, Jenna suggested we set up a shared family location app together. She'd never once cared about the technical side of our smart home system before. She usually just wanted things to work, didn't care how they worked. But that spring, she came to me with the idea herself. "What if we set up a location sharing thing, just for safety?" she said. God forbid something happens to one of us on the road or the car breaks down somewhere sketchy, I just want us to always be able to find each other.
I thought it was sweet, genuinely. I thought, this woman loves me enough to want me to know she's safe. We set it up together on the couch one Sunday afternoon, laughing about which little cartoon avatar to pick for each of us. I know now, and this still makes my stomach turn a little to say out loud, that she didn't suggest that app because she wanted me to feel safe. She suggested it because a shared, mutually installed location app looks completely different from a secretive one. If I ever got suspicious enough to check her location later, I'd see it as something she'd proposed, something loving and transparent, not something I'd forced on her. It gave her cover. It made her look like the trusting one in the relationship. What she didn't count on was that the exact same app she used to build that cover would end up being one of the tools that helped take her down. Around the same time, something else changed that I want to mention because it's a detail a lot of you watching are going to recognize from your own lives. Jenna started working out with much more intensity than she ever had before. New gym clothes, a meal plan she followed religiously. She lost weight, not an unhealthy amount, just noticeably more toned, more confident in her body than she'd been in years. At the time, I took it as a good thing. I told her how great she looked all the time because I meant it. I remember one night specifically complimenting her with a fitted black dress before we went out to a friend's birthday. She got almost angry. I brushed it off fast, changed the subject, said I thought that was nice. I understand now that it was good. The compliment was husband hits different than not I think some small part of it didn't sit in that moment without feeling the weight of what she was doing. I also remember, because it matters to what comes later in the story, that Jenna had always been the one who handled our home software on a day-to-day basis, even though I was the one who set everything up. She was the one who adjusted the thermostat from her phone when she got cold. She was the one who told our smart speaker to play music while she cooked. She knew the system. She used it constantly, comfortably, without a second thought, which meant she also assumed, wrongly, that she understood its limits. She thought if she deleted a video clip, it was just gone, erased. She had no idea there was a system log underneath the surface she couldn't see, quietly recording the fact that a deletion had happened at all, even if the footage itself was wiped clean. She knew enough about the system to be dangerous to herself and not quite enough to be safe.
There's a particular kind of grief that comes from realizing the last year or two of your good marriage might not have been what you thought it was. I want to be honest with you about that because I think it matters for anyone watching this who might be sitting in a similar situation right now. It's not just the affair itself that hurts. It's going back through every warm memory afterward and wondering, quietly, privately, was that real? Or was that guilt? Was that a performance? I don't have a perfect answer to that, even now, all this time later. I think some of it was real. I think Jenna, in her own complicated, selfish way, did still love parts of our life together. I don't think that makes any of it okay. I think it just makes it more complicated and more painful than a simple story about a woman who fell out of love and left. She didn't leave. She just took what she wanted from somewhere else and kept the rest of us, me, our home, our families, her own reputation, exactly where she wanted us, a soft place to land whenever she needed one. But what happened next, I never saw coming. Because it wasn't a hunch or a friend's warning or lipstick on a collar that finally cracked this thing open. It was a $40 smart plug I bought on a whim 3 years into building out our home automation system. A plug that logged, with a timestamp, every single time it turned a lamp on or off. And that log doesn't lie. It doesn't forget. It doesn't feel guilty and try to make up for it with an extra nice dinner. It just remembers everything. Let me take you back to that Tuesday I mentioned at the very beginning of this video, the one with the door log. It started as nothing. I was just being nosy, honestly.
I'd gotten a notification on my phone that our smart thermostat had detected unusual temperature fluctuation, basically a fancy way of saying the AC was working overtime because a door or window had been open. I opened the app mostly out of curiosity, the same way you'd glance at a weird noise in your car. Jenna had told me that morning she wasn't feeling well. Migraine, she said, plus some stomach thing. She was staying home from the office. I texted her around noon to check in, and she sent that NyQuil picture, said she was going to try to sleep it off. So when I saw that the front door had been unlocked from the outside, meaning someone used a key or code, not someone leaving from inside, at 2:14 p.m., my first thought wasn't suspicion, it was concern. Maybe a delivery guy. Maybe her mom stopped by to check on her.
I texted her, "Hey, did your mom come by earlier? Saw the door opened on the app, lo. Big Brother's watching." She responded almost instantly, "No? Weird. Maybe a delivery. I was asleep, didn't hear anything." That should have been the end of it, except our doorbell camera, which records every single motion event, package delivery, and person that comes within 15 feet of our porch, had absolutely nothing logged between 1:52 p.m. and 2:15 p.m. Not no motion detected, deleted. Now, I need to explain something for those of you who aren't tech people. Our camera system doesn't just delete footage randomly. Clips get removed in 3 ways. They age out after 30 days automatically. A full system malfunction wipes a range, or, and this is the part that made my stomach drop, someone manually deletes a specific clip from the app. I checked the activity log, not just the footage, the system log, the one buried 3 menus deep that even I sometimes forget exists. It's the kind of log a tech-savvy IT guy sets up because he's paranoid about hackers, never imagining he'd use it to catch his own wife. It showed a login from our home Wi-Fi at 2:31 p.m., 17 minutes after the mystery door opening. Someone had gone into the app on our home network and manually deleted the exact 17 minutes of footage that would show who came through that door. I sat there staring at my phone for probably 10 minutes straight. My brain was doing this thing where it kept trying to build an innocent explanation. Maybe she woke up, felt paranoid about a stranger being caught on camera in her pajamas, deleted it out of privacy, panic mode, migraine brain making bad decisions. I wanted so badly to believe that. I didn't confront her that night. I want to be honest with you about that, because I think it's an important part of this story. I didn't march into the bedroom and demand answers. Something in me, some instinct I didn't even fully understand yet, told me to wait, to watch, to gather more before I said a single word.
So for the next 4 days, I didn't sleep right. I'd lie next to her at night, listening to her breathe, wondering who else had heard that exact same breathing pattern. I hated myself for the thought, and then I'd have it again 5 minutes later. I started paying attention to every device in the house differently, not as a smart home hobbyist anymore, as an investigator. Here's the thing about a fully automated smart home, and I want every one of you watching this to actually think about your own house for a second. It remembers everything. The smart thermostat logs every temperature change and who adjusted it, down to which phone made the change. The garage door logs every open and close. The router logs every device that connects, when and for how long. Most people set this stuff up for convenience and never think about it again. I set mine up for convenience too. I just happened to also be the only person in the house who knew how to actually read it. The next morning, I did something I'm not proud of, but I also don't regret. I called in sick to work, the first time I'd done that in almost 2 years, and I told Jenna I had a stomach bug. She kissed my forehead, told me to rest, and left for the office like it was any other day. I spent that entire day going through every single device log I had access to, one by one, with the kind of focus I usually reserve for a work deadline. I made a folder on my laptop. I named it something boring and innocent,
home network maintenance, so if she ever glanced at my screen, she'd have no reason to look twice. The doorbell camera's motion history showed something else I'd missed the first time through. Going back 6 weeks, there were 8 other gaps, never as long as the 23 minutes from that Tuesday, but always suspiciously clean. 4, 5, 6 minutes at a time, always around early afternoon, always on a day Jenna claimed to be either sick, working from home, or running a quick errand. 8 gaps in 6 weeks, not random glitches, a pattern of someone learning in real time how much footage they could get away with deleting without it looking suspicious. I want to pause here and explain something, because I think it's important for anyone watching this who might someday find themselves doing exactly what I was doing. Going through this data wasn't satisfying. It wasn't some empowering montage like you'd see in a movie. It was slow and sick-making, and every new gap I found felt like another small stab wound in the same spot.
I kept a running list, dated and time-stamped, in a document only I had access to. I told myself I was just checking, just being thorough. But somewhere around gap number 5, I stopped pretending to myself that I was looking for an innocent explanation. I was building a case. 4 days after the door incident, I found the second thread. Our smart thermostat has a feature that logs which zone of the house is occupied based on motion sensors. I'd installed it because our house runs cold in winter, and I wanted heating zoned to whoever was actually home. On a Thursday, Jenna told me she was working from the office all day, a full 9 to 5, no lunch breaks, big closing to prep for. The occupancy log showed motion in our bedroom, not the living room, not the kitchen, from 12:47 p.m. to 2:03 p.m., 76 minutes, in our bedroom, while she was supposedly at the office, 40 minutes away. I remember exactly where I was when I saw that. I was in the break room at my own office, and I had to sit down on the edge of a table because my legs genuinely felt unsteady. A coworker asked if I was okay, and I told her I just needed water. I don't even remember getting the water. That weekend, I did something I'd never done in 11 years of marriage. I followed her. Jenna told me she was heading to her Saturday morning gym class, the same one she'd been going to for the better part of a year. I told her I was going to run some errands, and instead I drove to the shopping center across the street from her gym and parked where I had a clear line of sight to the entrance, engine off, sunglasses on, like some kind of amateur detective in a bad movie. She went in at 9:04 a.m., gym bag over her shoulder, exactly like she said she would. I sat there for almost 45 minutes, feeling like an absolute fool, wondering what I was even doing, half convinced I was about to see nothing at all and would have to live with the shame of having stalked my own wife's workout for nothing. At 9:51, a black pickup truck pulled into the gym's side lot, the employee and trainer parking, away from the main entrance most members used. A tall guy in a fitted gray t-shirt got out, gym bag over one shoulder, and walked in through a side entrance instead of the front. I didn't know his name yet. I didn't know anything about him yet. But something about the way he moved through that side entrance, casual, familiar, like he'd done it 1,000 times, made my stomach drop in a way the earlier logs hadn't quite managed.
Jenna came out at 10:35, right on schedule. Hair damp, gym bag over her shoulder, looking exactly like someone who just finished an ordinary workout class. Nothing about her appearance suggested anything out of the ordinary at all. That, more than almost anything else, is what disturbed me the most. Not that something might be happening, that she could walk out of that building looking so completely, convincingly normal. I want to talk about the why for a second, because I know a lot of you are screaming it at your screen right now. Why didn't she just leave if she was unhappy? Why do this instead? I've had a long time to think about this, and I think the answer is the same answer it almost always is in these stories. because leaving requires honesty, and honesty requires consequences. Jenna had built a comfortable life, a house she loved, a husband who provided stability, who never raised his voice, who automated the thermostat so she'd never come home cold. Leaving meant giving that up. Cheating let her keep all of it: the house, the stability, the amazing husband reputation with her friends and family, while also getting whatever it was she felt she was missing. That's not romantic. That's not passionate, can't help myself love. That's calculated. That's a cost-benefit analysis where I was the benefit column and someone else was the excitement column, and she decided she could have both if she was just careful enough. I think there's a version of this story where the affair happens because someone falls hard for another person, gets swept up, loses their judgment for a while, and eventually has to make an agonizing choice between two lives. That version is still a betrayal, but there's a kind of humanity in it, a messiness that at least makes some emotional sense. This wasn't that. This was someone deleting camera footage with the same precision she used to file paperwork at her real estate office. This was someone maintaining a fabricated calendar of open houses with the same discipline she used to meal prep on Sundays. This was someone who, according to her own words in a group chat she thought was private, had done the math and decided the affair was worth the risk as long as she managed the logistics correctly. If you're watching this and feeling that particular kind of rage on my behalf, the rage that comes from realizing you weren't just betrayed, you were managed, I want you to know that's a completely valid thing to feel. It's one thing to be hurt by someone's weakness. It's another thing entirely to realize you were a line item in someone else's spreadsheet. But what happened next, I never saw coming.
Because 5 days after the bedroom occupancy log, I found the piece of evidence that turned my stomach into something I can't fully describe. Our smart speaker, the one in the kitchen, the one we used constantly for music, timers, weather, has a voice history you can review in the app. Every command it hears gets logged with a timestamp, even the ones it misheard or that weren't meant for it. On the day of the door incident, the very same Tuesday, at 2:09 p.m., 5 minutes before the door opened, the log showed a voice command: "Alexa, turn off the porch camera light." I don't have a porch camera light that responds to voice commands. I built that system. There is no such device. Which means someone said something close to that, maybe trying to figure out how to disable the camera, testing commands out loud, and the speaker logged its best guess at what it heard. That means someone was standing in my kitchen 5 minutes before my wife's sick wife's front door opened from the outside, trying to disable a security system by voice. That means Jenna wasn't the only person in my house that day. I need you to sit with me in that moment for a second, because this is where the story shifts entirely. Up until this point, I thought maybe there was an explanation, a sleepwalking fugue state, a bizarre coincidence, something, anything. But a second voice in my kitchen trying to disable a security system 5 minutes before a door opened from the outside on a day my wife claimed to be alone and sick in bed? That's not a coincidence. That's a conspiracy in my own home. I want to describe something small for you because I think it captures the strange, disorienting nature of discovering something like this through data instead of catching it with your own eyes. I never saw a face. I never heard an actual voice. Everything I knew in that moment came from timestamps and misheard commands and gaps in footage. Cold, clinical facts with no human warmth or malice attached to them at all. And somehow that made it worse, not better. There was no scene to picture, no image to fixate on and eventually process, just numbers on a screen, telling me with total certainty that my life had quietly changed shape sometime in the last several months, and I was only now finding out. I didn't cry, if you're wondering. I think that might surprise some of you. I think I was too far past shock and into something colder, something that felt, honestly, a little bit like clarity. Because here's what I realized in that break room, staring at a voice log on my phone. Jenna was good at hiding this, genuinely skilled. She'd covered her tracks in every conventional way.
No weird texts I could find, no lipstick, no perfume, no receipts, nothing on her actual phone that I had any access to. But she made one mistake, the same mistake almost every calculated cheater makes eventually. She got comfortable. I think there's a lesson in that for anyone who's ever gotten away with something small and let it convince them they could get away with something bigger. The first lie is always the most carefully constructed one. People triple-check their alibis, delete every trace, rehearse their story in the mirror. But the 50th lie doesn't get that same treatment. By then, the fear has worn off, replaced by a kind of dangerous muscle memory. You start trusting the system that's worked for you so far, without remembering that the system was never actually foolproof. You just hadn't run into its limits yet. She'd been doing this, whatever this fully was, for what I now suspected was months, maybe longer, and nothing bad had ever happened. No one had caught her. So she got sloppy. She stopped being as careful in the house itself, because the house was safe. Home was the one place she probably felt she didn't need to perform. She forgot that home was also the one place I'd spent 3 years wiring with sensors, cameras, and logs. There's something almost poetic about that, if I'm being honest with you. Every single device in that system existed because I wanted to take care of her. The porch light I automated so she'd never walk into a dark house. The thermostat I zoned so she'd never be cold waiting for me to get home. The cameras I installed, if I'm being completely truthful, mostly out of a slightly overprotective instinct to keep her safe when I wasn't around. I built an entire ecosystem out of love, and it ended up being the exact thing that couldn't be fooled by charm or tears or a well-rehearsed excuse. Data doesn't care how convincing you are. It just remembers. I want to tell you about one more piece of evidence I found that same week, because I think this is the moment a lot of you watching are going to want to yell at your screen. Jenna's work calendar synced automatically to our shared smart home hub, something we'd set up years earlier so the system would know when to adjust the thermostat around her schedule, and so it could announce her upcoming appointments in the kitchen speaker in the mornings. I'd honestly forgotten that integration even existed. I pulled up 3 months of her synced calendar entries and started cross-referencing them against the smart thermostat's occupancy data. 22 separate times over those 3
months. Her calendar showed an open house scheduled, sometimes an hour, sometimes 2, during a window when the occupancy sensors showed continuous motion in our own house instead. 22 phantom open houses. Not one property address matched an actual listing I could later verify through her office's public website. I sat there in my car in a grocery store parking lot. I remember exactly where I was. I'd pulled over because my hands started shaking too much to keep driving. And I did the math out loud to no one in an empty car. 22 fake open houses, an average of 90 minutes each. That's over 30 hours of fabricated work commitments in 3 months just to be somewhere else. 30 hours she told her own boss she was working, told me she was working, and instead spent doing God knows what 40 feet from where I sat, pretending everything in our marriage was fine. If you're watching this and you've ever had that sick feeling of doing math you didn't want the answer to, you already know exactly what that parking lot felt like. I want to be honest about where my head went next, because I think it's important for this story. My first instinct, the human, animal, gut-level instinct, was to go home that night and scream, throw her stuff out on the lawn, call her parents, post it online, burn it all down in one single explosive night. But something stopped me, And it wasn't restraint exactly, it was strategy. Because if I confronted her with what I had, a deleted camera clip, an occupancy log, a mysterious voice command, she would do what smart, calculated people do when they're cornered with partial evidence. She'd deny it. She'd construct an explanation. Oh, that was just the cleaning lady. Or, I must have said something weird in my sleep-deprived migraine state. Or, worst of all, she'd realize I was onto her and destroy whatever evidence remained before I could build a complete picture. I needed more. I needed all of it. I needed proof so complete, so undeniable, that there would be no story she could spin her way out of. So I made a decision that night, lying next to her, listening to her breathe evenly in her sleep like nothing in the world was wrong. I decided I wasn't going to be the husband who got angry. I was going to be the husband who got even smarter than she'd been.
But what happened next, I never saw coming. Because turning my own house into a surveillance operation against the person I loved most is one of the strangest, loneliest things a person can do. And what I found over the following 2 weeks didn't just confirm an affair. It revealed something so much bigger, so much more deliberate, that even now, telling you this story, it still makes my hands go cold. I want to walk you through exactly how I built my case, because I think a lot of you are going to want the details, not for revenge purposes, well, maybe for that too, but because I genuinely believe understanding how deep smart home data goes is important for anyone living in a connected house. The first thing I did was stop reacting emotionally to every new piece of evidence and start treating this like a project. I made a spreadsheet. I know how that sounds, but I needed dates, times, and device logs organized in a way I could actually analyze, because my brain alone couldn't hold the emotional weight of 11 years of marriage while also cross-referencing occupancy sensors. Step 1. I went back through every device's historical log as far as it would let me. Most systems store 30 to 90 days, depending on the subscription tier. I have the higher tier on almost everything, because of course I do, because I'm the guy who over-engineers his own house. What I found, going back 12 weeks, was a pattern. Every Tuesday and every other Thursday, between roughly 12:30 p.m. and 2:30 p.m., our bedroom motion sensor logged activity, while Jenna's phone GPS, which, yes, I could see through our shared family location app, the one she insisted we set up for safety years ago, showed her location pinging from our house, not the office. 12 out of the last 14 Tuesdays, every single time. Step 2, I needed to know who, not just that someone was there, I needed a name. This is where I got resourceful, in a way I'm honestly a little proud of. Our router logs every device that connects to our Wi-Fi network by something called a MAC address, basically a unique fingerprint for every phone, laptop, or tablet. Jenna's phone connects automatically because it's saved on our network. My phone, same thing. But on 11 of those 12 Tuesdays, a third device connected to our guest Wi-Fi network for roughly 90 minutes each time, a device I didn't recognize. Now, a MAC address alone doesn't hand you a name, but it gave me a manufacturer, a specific phone model, and a device nickname, because a lot of phones broadcast a name when they connect to Wi-Fi if the owner hasn't changed the default settings.
The nickname on this device was Ryan's iPhone. There's one more log I checked that same night, mostly out of paranoid thoroughness, and it ended up being one of the most useful pieces of the whole case. Our garage door opener is smart-enabled too. I'd wired it in years ago so I could check from my phone whether Jenna had forgotten to close it on her way to work. The garage door log showed something I hadn't even thought to look for. On every single one of those Tuesdays, the garage door had been manually closed from inside the garage using the wall-mounted button roughly 90 minutes after opening, instead of Jenna's usual habit of closing it remotely from her phone the moment she pulled out of the driveway. That single detail told me something important.
Whoever was coming and going wasn't using the garage as an entrance or exit at all. They were parking a car inside it, out of view of the street, out of view of any neighbor who might recognize an unfamiliar vehicle in our driveway. That's when I understood how careful this actually was. This wasn't two people who kept almost getting caught. This was a system, a routine. Park in the garage, keep it hidden, come in through the house, use the guest Wi-Fi out of habit because the primary network required a password Ryan never had. Every piece of it engineered to leave the smallest possible footprint. Except a footprint isn't the same thing as no footprint, and a house wired with sensors doesn't care how careful you think you're being. I sat with that name for 2 full days before I did anything with it. Ryan. I ran through every Ryan I could think of. The guy from her office I remembered vaguely from a work holiday party 3 years back. Tall, kind of a gym bro energy, always talking about his personal training side hustle. I actually remembered a specific conversation with him at that party, standing near the drinks table, making small talk the way you do with a stranger you'll probably never see again. He'd told me he was building up a client list, hoping to eventually leave his day job and train full-time. I remember thinking he seemed like a nice enough guy, a little full of himself maybe, the way a lot of gym guys are, but harmless. I even remember introducing him to Jenna that night, walking her over and saying something like, "Hey, you should talk to this guy. You've been wanting to get back into a workout routine." I actually introduced them. I stood there 3 years later, staring at his name on a Wi-Fi log, realizing that the very first conversation between my wife and the man she'd eventually betray me with happened because I walked her over and made the introduction myself at my own company's holiday party because I thought I was doing something nice for her.
If there's a moment in this entire story where I felt something crack open in my chest that I don't think will ever fully close, that was it. I want to pause here and tell you something important. I didn't go digging through her phone. I didn't hack her email. Everything I found came from devices I owned, I set up, and I paid the subscription for, sitting inside my own home. I want to be really clear about that because it matters, both morally and, as it turned out, legally. Step 3 was confirming Ryan. I remember Jenna had mentioned once, months earlier, almost in passing, that she'd switched personal trainers at her gym to this guy who's way better with form correction. I'd nodded along at the time, not thinking twice about it. I hadn't even remembered until that exact moment that it was the same Ryan. I looked up her gym's website. They listed their trainers with photos and bios. There he was, Ryan, same guy from the holiday party. Married himself, as it turned out. A wedding photo on his own public social media, posted 4 years earlier. A wife named Sarah, smiling in a white dress. This is the part of the story where I want every one of you to lean in, because this is where affair turned into calculated, cruel operation. And it's the part that made me go from devastated to genuinely furious. I found Ryan's Instagram. Mostly gym content, protein shakes, motivational quotes. But buried in his posts from about 8 months back, there was a photo of a group at a downtown restaurant, a birthday celebration for one of the gym staff. In the background, blurry, half cut off at the edge of frame, was a woman in a green dress. Jenna owned a green dress. I knew it because I'd complimented her in it 8 months earlier when she said she wore it to a girls' night with Danielle and Priya. I zoomed in. I compared photos. It was her. That's when I understood the group chat going quiet wasn't a coincidence either. Danielle and Priya, her closest friends for 15 years, either knew and said nothing or had been fed the same lies I had. I needed to find out which. I want to be honest about something uncomfortable here. For about a day and a half, I genuinely considered the possibility that I was about to blow up a friendship I'd valued for a decade for nothing. That maybe Danielle and Priya had no idea. That maybe I'd end up looking paranoid and cruel if I approached this wrong. I've always liked Danielle.
She'd been kind to me in ways that went beyond just being my wife's friend. She'd helped me pick out Jenna's anniversary gifts more than once. She'd remembered my mother's birthday every single year without being asked.
The idea that she might have known, might have sat across from me at holiday dinners with this secret sitting quietly behind her eyes was almost as painful as the affair itself. Betrayal, it turns out, doesn't just come from the person who cheats. Sometimes it comes from everyone who watched it happen and said nothing. So here's where my plan really started to take shape, and I want to walk you through it step by step because the planning phase is honestly the part of this story I get asked about the most. Step 1 of the plan? Documentation. I started keeping everything. Screenshots of every log, time-stamped, backed up to a personal cloud drive Jenna had no access to, and also emailed to myself and to a personal email address at my mother's house in case anything happened to my phone or laptop. I know that sounds paranoid. It is paranoid. It's also exactly what my lawyer later told me saved this entire case. Step 2, I reached out to Danielle. This was the scariest call I've ever made. Danielle had been Jenna's maid of honor. If she was in on this and warned Jenna, my entire 6 weeks of quiet evidence gathering would be blown in a single phone call. I rehearsed what I was going to say for almost an hour before I actually dialed her number, sitting in my own car in my own driveway, unable to bring myself to walk inside until I'd figured out exactly how to approach this without tipping my hand too early. I needed her to talk to me honestly, without immediately running to warn Jenna the second we hung up. I called her under the guise of planning a surprise anniversary trip. Our 12th was coming up in about 10 weeks, and asked if she wanted to help me pick a location Jenna would love. Then, carefully, gently, I asked if Jenna had seemed different lately, stressed, distant, anything. There was a pause on the line that told me everything before Danielle said a single word. "Mark," she said slowly, "I need you to tell me something, and I need you to not shoot the messenger because I told her I thought this was a terrible idea from the start." Danielle told me the group chat hadn't moved. It had moved. Jenna had created a second chat, just her, Danielle, and Priya, specifically to talk about Ryan, and specifically because she didn't trust the original chat to stay private, since I sometimes borrowed Jenna's laptop, and she was worried I'd see notifications pop up. She'd been seeing him, according to Danielle, for around 10 months. It had started, ironically, at the gym, exactly where Jenna told me she'd been going more often to get healthier for us. Danielle told me Jenna had said, verbatim in that chat, "I'm not going to blow up my whole life over this. Mark's a good provider, he's stable, I just need something Ryan gives me that Mark doesn't. I can keep both." I want you to just sit with that sentence for a second, because it changed something fundamental in how I understood my marriage. This wasn't a person who fell into an affair and felt consumed by guilt. This was a person who had made a calculated decision that she could have her stable life and her excitement on the side as long as she was careful. I was never the love of her life. I was the infrastructure, the provider, the stability she built her secret life on top of, the same way I'd built our smart home system for her convenience. Danielle, to her credit, told me she'd tried to talk Jenna out of it multiple times. She said Priya had actually stopped responding to the group chat for a while out of discomfort. Danielle apologized to me repeatedly for not saying something sooner, but explained she felt trapped between loyalty to her oldest friend and doing the right thing. I told her I understood, and I meant it, mostly. But I also asked her for one thing. Would you be willing to help me? Not to hurt Jenna, just to help me get the full truth in a way that's undeniable. I don't want a fight where she can twist things. I want the truth, laid out so clearly that there's nothing left to argue. Danielle agreed. I want to tell you about a near miss that happened right around this time because it genuinely could have ended everything before I was ready. 3 days after my call with Danielle, Jenna came home acting strange, quieter than usual, watching me a little too closely over dinner.
I found out afterward that Priya had accidentally referenced something in a text, a joke about checking in soon, that made Jenna paranoid someone in her circle might be talking to me. For about 48 hours, I genuinely thought I'd lost the element of surprise completely. I remember lying awake that entire Wednesday night, running worst-case scenarios. If Jenna suspected I knew, she'd go into damage control mode, delete the second group chat, coach Ryan on a cover story, maybe even try to get ahead of it by confessing to something smaller to protect a bigger secret. I've seen enough of these stories to know cornered people get slippery fast. So I did something calculated of my own. I overcorrected in the opposite direction. Extra affectionate, extra relaxed, planned a low-key date night, told her I'd been feeling really grateful for us lately. I wanted her to feel completely safe again. I wanted her guard back down before I made my next move. It worked. By the weekend, she was back to her old rhythm. Gym on Tuesday, late office days on Thursday, the same patterns the logs had already shown me for weeks. Whatever spooked her had passed. Before I moved forward with anything else, I sat down with a divorce attorney, someone a coworker had recommended after his own difficult split a few years back. I brought printouts, timestamps, screenshots organized by date. He actually stopped me about 10 minutes in and said, "Most people who come in here have a feeling and a few suspicious texts. You've built an entire case file. Where did you learn to do this?" I told him the truth. I didn't learn it anywhere. I just knew my own house better than anyone else in it. He walked me through exactly what I could and couldn't legally do. Anything from devices I owned on my own home network was fair game. Anything involving hacking her personal phone, her email, or any account not shared with me would not only be inadmissible, it could actually expose me to legal trouble. That single conversation shaped everything I did from that point forward. I wasn't going to let my own anger hand her away to become the victim in this story. Step 3 of the plan, the fake business trip. Here's where things get, I'll admit, a little bit theatrical, but everything I'm about to describe is completely legal. I checked with a lawyer before doing any of it, because I wanted to make sure that whatever I found could actually be used if this ended in divorce proceedings, and I wanted zero chance of this backfiring into something that made me look like the villain. I told Jenna I had a mandatory 3-day work conference out of state, completely fabricated, but I had a coworker who was actually attending a real conference and agreed to cover for me if Jenna ever called his office line, which she never did because why would she check on a business trip? I left on a Tuesday morning. In reality, I stayed with a friend 15 minutes away and left every single smart device in the house running exactly as it always did. I want to walk you through that morning specifically because I think about it constantly. I packed a real suitcase, dress shirts, my laptop, my toiletry bag, because Jenna watched me pack it the night before, and I needed every detail to hold up under casual observation. I kissed her goodbye at the door, she told me to be safe and call her when I landed, and I said I would. And I meant every word of that particular lie the same calm way she must have meant hers for the better part of a year. I drove exactly the direction I would drive toward the airport for about 20 minutes, then looped back through a completely different route to my friend's apartment, partly out of genuine paranoia that she might somehow glance at my location on that shared family app we'd set up years earlier, and partly just because I wanted to be thorough. I checked myself into a fake flight status on the family app manually, marking myself as having boarded, something the app allowed for exactly this kind of manual override, originally intended for when your phone's signal was unreliable mid-flight. I called the coworker covering for me and confirmed our story one more time, thanked him more sincerely than he probably realized the situation warranted, and then I sat on my friend's couch that first evening and just waited. I want to be honest. This wasn't about catching Ryan physically in my house on camera, walking around, though a small angry part of me wanted exactly that. It was about seeing what Jenna did with 3 full days of freedom. I wanted the complete picture, every log, every device, every hour. Step 4. Enlisting Priya. Once Danielle confirmed everything, I asked her if she thought Priya would talk to me too. Priya had been quieter in all of this, according to Danielle, someone who'd tried to stay out of it entirely, uncomfortable with the whole situation, but not willing to be the one to break the group apart by saying something. I called her 2 days later. She picked up on the first ring, like she'd been waiting for exactly this call and dreading it from after Monday. "I need you to know I hated this," she said, almost before I could get a full sentence out. I told her more than once that this was going to blow up in her face, and I told her I wasn't going to lie to your face directly if you ever asked me point blank. I didn't know how to bring it to you myself. It felt like it wasn't my place. I understood, and I meant it. I wasn't interested in punishing the people who'd been dragged into Jenna's decisions against their will. I was interested in the truth. And then I asked her for help with one specific thing. Priya, once she found out how much I already knew, felt an enormous wave of guilt, and she agreed to do something that ended up being the single most important piece of this entire plan. She agreed to text Jenna, completely naturally, asking if she wanted to do a girls' night during my trip, the exact kind of invitation Jenna had used as cover stories for months. Except, this time I knew in advance whether Jenna said yes or made an excuse, and I could cross-reference it against what the house was actually recording. Jenna told Priya she was wiped out, gonna have a lazy few days to myself, maybe next week. The house occupancy sensors told a very different story. Over those 3 days, Ryan's iPhone connected to our guest network on Tuesday afternoon for 4 hours, Wednesday evening for 6 hours, including an overnight stay, confirmed by continuous bedroom motion sensor activity from 9 p.m. to past 7 a.m., and Thursday afternoon again for 3 hours. He slept in my bed, in my house, while I was supposedly out of town for work, and Jenna told her own friend she was having a quiet few days alone. I remember reading that overnight log at my friend's apartment at 2 a.m., and for the first time in this entire 6 weeks, I actually broke down. Not out of surprise anymore. I'd expected this, honestly, by that point, but out of the sheer scale of the disrespect, not just to me, to our entire life, to the bed we picked out together, to the house I built with my own hands and my own paycheck and my own 2-year home automation obsession that I now realized had become the very tool exposing her. My friend, whose couch I was crashing on, found me still awake at 4 a.m. scrolling through screenshots. He asked if I wanted a drink or to talk or just turn my phone off for a night. I told him no. I told him I wanted to see the rest of it, every hour, every log. If I was going to carry this pain anyway, I wanted the complete truth, not a partial version I'd have to keep discovering in pieces for months afterward. There was one more thing in that log that I haven't mentioned yet, and it's the detail that finally, fully extinguished any last flicker of doubt I had. Our smart thermostat has a feature that logs manual adjustments by device. At 11:52 p.m. that Wednesday night, someone lowered the temperature 2 degrees using Jenna's phone. At 12:04 a.m., 12 minutes later, someone raised it right back up using a completely different device, one that had never once appeared on our network before and never appeared again after that week. 2 people negotiating the thermostat in my bedroom in the middle of the night like they lived there. But what happened next, I never saw coming, because I didn't just stop at gathering evidence. Once I had everything, the logs, the friend's testimony, the photos, the overnight stay confirmed down to the minute, I realized I had something even bigger than proof of an affair. I had proof of a pattern, a calculated, months-long deception, executed with intention, hidden with real effort. And I now had every tool I needed to make sure that when this came out, she would have absolutely no room to spin it, minimize it, or turn it around on me. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to throw her clothes on the lawn like some movie scene. I was going to let the truth do all the work, in front of exactly the people whose opinions mattered most to her. And I already knew exactly how I was going to do it. I came home from my business trip on Thursday evening, right on schedule. Jenna greeted me at the door with a hug that lasted a beat too long, the kind of hug I now understood was guilt dressed up as affection. She'd made my favorite dinner, chicken parm, the way my mom used to make it. She'd learned the recipe just for me years ago. I ate that dinner and told her about my business trip. I told her a fake story about a fake keynote speaker. I watched her nod along, asking follow-up questions, being a perfect, attentive wife. I want to be honest with you, that dinner was one of the hardest things I've ever sat through. Not because I was scared of her, but because some small, stubborn part of me still loved the woman across that table, even while I knew with complete certainty exactly what she'd done for the last 3 days in our bed. But I'd made a decision. I wasn't confronting her that night. I had one more piece to put in place first. The following 10 days were, without question, the strangest of my entire marriage. I went to work, I came home, I ate dinner across the table from a woman I now had overwhelming evidence had spent the better part of a year deceiving me, and I smiled and asked about her day and let her believe she'd gotten away with everything. I won't pretend that was easy. There were nights I sat in our bathroom with the fan running so she wouldn't hear, just breathing, trying to keep myself steady enough to make it through one more ordinary evening. There were mornings I watched her get ready for work, humming to herself, picking out an outfit, completely at ease, and had to remind myself, physically remind myself, with a hand pressed flat against the bathroom counter, that the plan needed those 10 days to come together properly. I used that time productively, at least. I met with my lawyer twice more to finalize the language for the separation agreement I intended to present. I quietly started looking at apartments, not to move, yet. Move immediately, but so I'd have options ready the moment this became official, rather than scrambling afterward in a fog of grief. I also, carefully and with Danielle's help, coordinated the guest list for what Jenna believed was an anniversary dinner, and what I knew was something else entirely. Danielle actually asked me at one point during those 10 days if I was sure I wanted to do it this way, in front of everyone, all at once, rather than privately first. I remember exactly what I told her. If I do this privately, she gets to control the story afterward. She's had a year of practice being the most convincing version of herself. I only get one shot at making sure the people who love her hear the truth before she has a chance to spin it. Danielle didn't argue with that. The setup. Here's what I planned, and I want to walk through the why behind every piece of it, because I built this specifically to be airtight, undeniable, and, importantly, to protect myself legally and financially before anything became messy. First, I'd already consulted a divorce attorney the week prior under complete confidentiality and laid out everything I had. He confirmed that our state is a no-fault divorce state, meaning infidelity itself doesn't automatically entitle me to a bigger share of assets, but it can absolutely matter for things like the narrative in a contested divorce, and more importantly, it mattered enormously for one specific thing: the house. The house, the one Ryan had slept in overnight while I paid the mortgage from 45 minutes away, pretending to be at a conference, was purchased 3 years before I met Jenna, using money from an inheritance from my grandfather. It had always remained solely in my name for exactly that reason, something my grandfather had insisted on when he left me that money. Jenna had never been added to the deed, something that honestly had never been a point of contention between us, until now, when it became the single most important legal fact in my entire plan. Second, I quietly moved a modest amount of money that was unambiguously mine from before the marriage, sitting in an account only I had access to, into a separate account at a different bank, purely so it couldn't be frozen or contested during a messy split. My lawyer confirmed every step of this was completely legal, given it was premarital, separately held money that had never been commingled into joint accounts. Third, and this is the part I think a lot of you are going to enjoy, I invited Jenna's parents, her sister, and yes, Danielle and Priya, to what I framed as an early celebration of our upcoming 12th anniversary. Nice dinners, private room, and restaurant to celebrate the years and talk about the future. Jenna, of course, had no idea what the future actually meant in that sentence. The dinner. I want to paint the scene for you because I think about it constantly. A private back room, string lights, a small, deliberate echo of our backyard wedding, which I promise you was intentional. Soft music, a table set for 8. Jenna's parents, her sister, Danielle, Priya, Jenna, and me. Everyone ordered. We made small talk. Jenna's mom made a toast about 11 wonderful years and how proud she was of the both of us. I stood up when the plates were cleared. I thanked everyone for coming, and I said I had something important to share about our marriage, something I felt everyone at this table, as people who loved Jenna and loved us as a couple, deserved to hear directly from me rather than through rumors later. Jenna's smile started to falter. I watched it happen in real time. I didn't yell, I didn't call her names. I spoke calmly, the way you'd present findings at a work meeting, because, in a sense, that's exactly what this was. I told them about the smart home logs, the door, the occupancy sensors, the deleted footage. I explained, plainly, without embellishment, what the data showed. 12 Tuesdays out of 14, a guest device named Ryan's iPhone, an overnight stay just 3 days ago while I was supposedly out of town. I watched Jenna's face go through every stage of realization, confusion, then dawning horror, then the specific kind of panic you only see on someone who thought they'd covered every angle and just discovered they hadn't. "Jenna, please, can we talk about this privately?" she started. "We can, after tonight, but everyone at this table has spent years believing in our marriage, celebrating our anniversaries, trusting that what they saw was real. I think they deserve the same honesty you owed me." Her mother's hand flew to her mouth. Her sister went completely white, and Danielle and Priya, the 2 people who'd already known, sat there with the particular stillness of people who'd been dreading this exact moment for weeks.
Jenna tried for a moment to deny it. "This is insane. He's making this up. He's been paranoid lately." But I'd come prepared. I pulled out my phone and showed the time-stamped logs, the overnight occupancy data, right there at the table, screenshots I'd organized specifically for this moment. And then Danielle, quietly, said, "Jenna, just stop. I told him I couldn't keep doing this." That was the moment everything actually collapsed, not when I presented data, when her own oldest friend confirmed it out loud in front of her family. Priya spoke next, quietly, her voice shaking. "I begged you to stop this back in the spring. I told you this would end in exactly this room, with exactly these people." She wasn't looking at me when she said it. She was looking at Jenna's mother, almost like she was apologizing directly to her for every month she'd stayed silent. Jenna's sister, who hadn't said a word the entire dinner, finally spoke. "How long?" she asked, just those 2 words. I told her the truth, as best the evidence showed it. 10 months, according to Danielle, possibly longer.
Jenna's father, a quiet man who I'd always gotten along with, pushed his chair back from the table without a word and walked out onto the restaurant's back patio alone. I found out later he stood out there for almost 20 minutes before coming back inside, eyes red, saying nothing to anyone for the rest of the night. I want to be honest, there is no universe where that dinner felt fun in the moment. It was one of the most painful evenings of my life. But there was also, underneath the pain, something I can only describe as relief. The truth was finally in the open, held up by evidence no one could argue with, in front of exactly the people's respect Jenna had spent years cultivating. The reckoning. For the 2 weeks following that dinner, Jenna tried nearly every approach I imagine most people try when they've been caught this completely. First came the tears, genuine ones, I believe, though genuine tears don't erase what caused them. She showed up at my temporary apartment twice unannounced, asking for just one real conversation, promising she could explain everything if I'd just give her the chance. I did give her that chance once, mostly because some stubborn part of me still needed to hear her say it out loud, in her own words, without a table full of family between us. She told me it had just happened, that she'd never meant for it to go on this long, that she still loved me and always had, even during the affair. I asked her one direct question. Did you delete the camera footage that Tuesday? She hesitated for exactly long enough to answer the question without saying a word. Yes, she finally said. I panicked. I didn't think you'd ever actually check the logs that carefully. That was the moment I understood, with total finality, that there was no version of an apology that could undo the calculation behind that decision. She hadn't panicked in the sense of an impulsive emotional mistake. She'd made a choice in the moment to actively erase evidence rather than come clean, because coming clean was never the plan. Getting away with it was the plan. My checking too carefully was simply the one variable she hadn't accounted for. I told her, as gently and as finally as I could manage, that I wasn't interested in reconciliation, not out of spite, because trust, once it's been managed and manipulated this deliberately, isn't something you can simply decide to feel again. The professional fallout. Here's a detail I didn't plan and honestly didn't need to. Remember those 22 phantom open houses I found cross-referenced against her calendar? A few weeks after the dinner, once word had inevitably reached her office through the small-town grapevine that exists in every industry, her broker, the owner of the real estate firm she worked for, quietly pulled her file and reviewed her logged commission activity against her scheduled appointments for the past year. I had nothing to do with that review. I never contacted her employer, never sent a single screenshot to anyone at that office, because my lawyer had been extremely clear that doing so could open me up to a defamation claim, however true the underlying facts were. I didn't need to. The truth had already started moving on its own, the way truth tends to once you stop propping up the lie holding it back. Danielle told me months later that Jenna's broker had apparently sat her down and asked her directly to account for several of those open house hours, since no corresponding listings, sign-in sheets, or client feedback forms existed for them. Standard paperwork every legitimate open house generates automatically. Jenna reportedly couldn't produce a single one. Jenna was let go from that job 2 months later, officially for performance and scheduling irregularities. I heard through mutual acquaintances that it took her almost 5 months to find comparable work elsewhere, and that she had to explain the gap to every single interviewer who asked. If you're the kind of person who's been quietly nodding along wanting some form of justice beyond just the divorce itself, that's the moment. That's the yes moment. Not because I
Okay.
But there was no scenario where this ended in anything but divorce. The house stayed mine cleanly because of that premarital deed. Our joint assets split according to state law, straightforward and unremarkable, because I never once tried to punish her financially beyond what was fair and legal. My lawyer was very clear that vindictive overreach can backfire badly in court, and honestly, I didn't need it to. The truth, laid out plainly, had already done more damage to her than any legal maneuvering could. I want to walk you through one more scene, because I think it's the moment the entire 6 weeks of quiet planning finally caught up with her completely. The divorce mediation happened about 4 months after the dinner, in a small conference room downtown, the kind with a scratched wooden table and bad coffee in the corner. Jenna showed up with her own attorney, someone her sister had recommended, a woman who I could tell had clearly been told a very sanitized version of events. Early in the session, Jenna's attorney tried to push for a larger share of the house's value, arguing some vague claim about contributions to the marital home over the years. My attorney simply slid the deed across the table, along with a one-page summary of the smart home evidence timeline. Nothing dramatic, just dates, devices, and a brief note about the guest network connection history. Jenna's attorney went quiet for a moment, glanced at Jenna, and I watched an entire conversation happen between them without a single word being spoken. She withdrew the request within the hour. There was no dramatic confrontation in that room, no raised voices, just the quiet, undeniable weight of documented facts doing exactly what they were built to do. If you've been waiting for a moment in this story where the calculated cheater finally runs out of angles to play, that conference room was it. The moment that actually felt like justice. About 3 months after the dinner, I ran into Jenna's mother at a grocery store, completely by accident. I braced myself for an awkward, angry exchange. Instead, she hugged me. She apologized genuinely for the years of trust I'd given her daughter that hadn't been returned. She told me Jenna had moved into a small apartment across town, that things between them had been strained since the truth came out, and that, in her words, she raised her better than this, and she knows it. I'm not going to pretend that moment fixed everything. It didn't. Grief doesn't work like that. But it was the first time since this whole thing started that I felt like the truth had actually landed. Exactly where it needed to. Not just with me, but with everyone whose respect Jenna had spent years quietly trading on. I sold the house 8 months later. Too many memories, honestly, both good and devastating, layered into every room. I moved into a smaller place, kept most of my smart home gear. Old habits die hard, and honestly, at this point, it felt less like a hobby and more like a skill I'd earned the hard way. I've had a lot of time now to sit with everything that happened, and I want to leave you with what I actually learned from this, because I think it matters more than the revenge itself. The first thing I learned is that betrayal rarely announces itself loudly. It creeps in through small inconsistencies, a group chat gone quiet, a workout that runs a little too long, a phone suddenly protected by Face ID that used to be shared freely. If something in your gut keeps nudging you, it's worth paying attention to, even when it's easier to look away. The second thing I learned is that the calmest, most methodical response is almost always more powerful than the loudest one. I could have screamed at Jenna the night I found that deleted camera clip. It would have felt good for about 10 minutes, and then she would have had time and warning and the ability to control the story before anyone else heard the truth. Instead, I waited, I gathered, and when I finally spoke, there was nothing left for her to argue with. The third thing, and this one took me the longest to actually believe, is that being the stable, reliable one in a relationship isn't a character flaw. For a long time after this, some small part of me wondered if I was somehow boring, if that's what drove her to Ryan. I don't believe that anymore. Stability is not a weakness. It's a gift you give someone. What she did with that gift was her choice, not a reflection of my worth. I also want to say something to anyone watching this who might currently be in the position I was 6 weeks before that Tuesday. The position of noticing small inconsistencies and talking yourself out of them because the alternative feels unbearable. I understand that impulse completely. I lived in it for the better part of 2 years. But I want you to know that the discomfort of finding out the truth, as brutal as it is almost always more survivable than the slow erosion of trusting your own instincts less and less every single day. You are allowed to look. You are allowed to ask questions. You are allowed to want clarity, even if the people around you tell you that you're being paranoid or dramatic or should just trust your partner. Trust is supposed to require you to ignore evidence sitting right in front of you. I also want to touch on something a little more technical for those of you who are the smart home person in your own household, the way I was in mine. I'm not telling you to go build a surveillance operation against your partner out of nowhere based on nothing. That's not healthy, and frankly, if you're doing that without real cause, that says something about the relationship too. But I do think it's worth understanding, in a general sense, just how much data our homes quietly collect about our daily lives, whether we ever think about it or not. Occupancy sensors, voice logs, network connections, door and lock histories. Most of us set this stuff up purely for convenience and never once think about what it's actually recording, or how long it's kept, or who else might be able to see it. I've had more than one person reach out to me since this happened, since I first started sharing pieces of this story with close friends, telling me they went back through their own home's device logs after a nagging feeling and either found nothing at all, which brought them real peace, or found something that changed everything for them too. I don't say that to encourage paranoia. I say it because I think most people genuinely don't realize their own home is quietly keeping a diary. I'm doing well now, for the record, in case you're wondering, genuinely well. I've learned more about myself in the last year than in the 11 years before it combined. I've reconnected with old friends I'd let drift during the busier years of my marriage. I started running again, something I used to love before life got in the way. I even started dating again, slowly, carefully, with a much sharper eye for the small inconsistencies I used to explain away. I'm not bitter, if that's the read you're getting from me. I'm just clear-eyed in a way I wasn't before. And honestly, that clarity has been worth every painful step it took to get here. I want to say one more thing about Danielle and Priya, because I think it matters. I've stayed close with both of them since everything happened, which might surprise some of you. I know some people would say I should have cut them off too for staying silent as long as they did. But I've thought about this a lot. And I understand the impossible position they were in, caught between loyalty to a lifelong friend and doing right by someone they also cared about. What mattered to me in the end wasn't that they'd known for a while. It was that when I finally asked them directly, they chose the truth over protecting the lie. That's not nothing. In a story of people who chose convenient deception, choosing honesty when it costs you something is worth recognizing. I think about my grandfather sometimes, too, the one whose inheritance quietly ended up protecting the one thing I built with my own hands before I ever met Jenna. He always used to tell me, take care of what's yours, and it'll take care of you when you least expect it. I don't think he meant it quite this literally, but I think about that advice differently now than I ever did before. Now I want to hear from you. If you were in my position, if your own smart home devices started telling a story your partner wasn't, what would you have done differently? Would you have confronted her the night you found that first deleted clip? Would you have handled the dinner differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and I promise the conversations in the comments section on these videos are honestly half the reason I keep telling these stories. If this story hit you the way I hope it did, do me a favor and hit subscribe, because I've got another one coming next week that might be even wilder than this one. And I never run out of these because it turns out, once people know you'll actually listen, they have a lot to tell you. Thanks for sticking with me through this one. I'll see you in the next story.